I want to welcome everybody to the second of our 5 presentations this week. Let's open with a word of prayer. Holy God, we thank you that you can guide, direct, and speak with us, that we have the freedoms and the rights to question our own humanity and your divinity. May we learn not to be afraid to question. In Jesus' name, Amen. In our first class together, someone's got their audio on there. We addressed a question about the rise and fall of the sixth and seventh kingdoms. And in that study, I tried to reiterate, because it's not the first time, that not only is there two different models, a model of progression and a dispensational model. We might call it the end and the beginning of kingdoms, and a term that we have used for a long time in our movement, which is parallel kingdoms. I don't know if people remember that. We used to talk about a kingdom ending and another one beginning. And then we began to speak about the gradual demise of one kingdom and the gradual rise of a second. And that fall and that rise happens at the same time. So we have a model that looks like this. Kingdom comes to its end, and then another one rises afterwards. That's what we used to teach. And then we began to teach it in a different way. We used to speak of the general fall of one kingdom and the rise of another. And we used to call this parallel. Hope there's no questions on that. So what we have found, that when we considered the sixth and seventh kingdom in particular, because that's where our focus has been, when we look at model number 1, that there isn't a singular point or waymark when we would say that the first ends and the second begins. Depending upon the story that you want to tell, you can have various ends and various beginnings. We discussed 4 points in our first presentation. Don't know if anybody can remember them. So this is a review of study number 1. And there were 4 points. Anybody remember any of them? Corinne? So number 1 was progression.
The last president?
So last president of the Sixth Kingdom. That was a study that we did in 2015. Next one. Kingdoms begin good. And the last one.
So I'm not sure of the last one, but I think is the feet of the statue of Daniel 2.
And what's that referring to? Okay, so I'll fill in the gap. When it comes to the Fifth Kingdom, we had iron and clay. State and church. Hope we're all okay with that. And even though they're institutionally a state and a church, what we knew is that in real life, this was a person and this was a person. And that person would be the head of the state and the head of the church. We'll put real. It's a real person. The difficulty that we might have faced, that when you go further back, first 4 kingdoms, gold, silver, brass, iron. When you looked at the state, it was easy to see the person. But many of us are not clear about the church part. It's the same real person or another person. Whether it's the wise men of Babylon or Nebuchadnezzar himself. That's why I focused on the fifth, because it's very easy to see. And the point in number 4 that Corinne could not remember because she remembered this bit was that in the 6th and 7th kingdom, I'll call it the iron because it is iron still. You all know, according to Daniel 2, that the iron goes right to the very end. This, it's the state. Something has changed. What changed? From number 5 to number 6 and 7. When we start trying to understand what the state is. Anybody have an idea? Besides Corinne? No one has. Go ahead, Corinne. It's just you and me today.
So he's not a real person anymore.
Anything else?
We talk more about an institution.
Excellent. So we'll just put on the board, not a person. Now it's an entity, a thing. It's not a living person. You need to be clear that we have made that change. So if you go to Revelation 17 and you have kings, kingdoms, states, you have a king which we all conceptualize as being a living person that can think. Gets into an illicit relationship with a woman who is identified as a prostitute. So the imagery of 17 is two people. Who have cognition, who have their own free wills. And we have subtly changed that. And maybe that change isn't as subtle as I've suggested. Because now, the king isn't even a person. It's a thing. And if we want to get crude, crass, instead of two people having sex, we have a woman having sex with a chair. So you have to be careful how you conceptualize these models now, these symbols. Now, there are people in our movement, not just one, who are concerned about what we are teaching. But we have taken several small steps. When you add those small steps together, it becomes a big leap or a big jump. And we've gone from a traditional view of prophecy, and traditional means correct. They want to conserve that. We call those conservatives. And they've said what we are beginning to do, in fact, we've already done it, is being so liberal in our thinking, in our modeling, that we're now teaching gross error. And it's for you to decide if that is so. So I try not to hide things. So I want to be open and frank, that if you have problems with what's on the board, you really can't continue to walk. I'll say it this way, to walk with me. When I mean me, I mean the other teachers that are speaking as well. I refer specifically to the Sunday law teachers when I say teachers. They may explain it slightly differently, but they're all using this model that's on the board to explain the fall of the sixth and the rise of the seventh, which is basically end time prophecy. And it's all based upon this idea that the king is no longer a person, but as Corinne said, an institution. So that's what we discussed in our first class. We used those 4 points to answer the question, which was, and the question was basically this: it appears that there is a discrepancy, which is a kind word to say mistake, in our teachings. In one breath, we say Sunday law, and in the next one, I'm going to use the word formalization. Not going to use the word panium. If you're not familiar with what I'm referring to, this is 2021. If you're not familiar with what I'm speaking about, this is the November election in 2020, when Biden becomes president. There's a discrepancy between that idea and the idea of the Sunday law. And we use these 4 points to defend that apparent discrepancy. That's what we discussed in class 1. So I'm not going to go over the proof of that. Just watch the class again if you don't remember. And of all these 4 points, point number 2 was the key, was the anchor. And I've been saying for quite some time now, someone, many of us, should go back and review the last president study, which is more than 10 years old now. I, real I realize it's not that easy because some of the material has is no longer available online. And we know the reason for that. It was the shaking and separation um, in 2019 when FFA left. They partitioned a lot of their material from the material that we had. Any questions so far? So I want to point out, hopefully I answered Corinne's question. I've asked her privately and she said that I had. So I've got 3 waymarks. This is the formalization. This is the Sunday law. And this is the close of probation. What we didn't discuss is that the 6th kingdom can be seen to end at 3 different waymarks. All of these horizontal arrows are all the 6th kingdom. The 6th kingdom can be seen to end at the formalization, at the Sunday law, and at the close of probation. Each of those 3 endpoints tells a different story. And the close of probation end is the final one. The other 2 help us to understand better what's happening through this history. That's why, if you've heard either myself or different speakers say that the 7th kingdom either comes at 2021 or 2024, this is why. So we could mark the 7th from the formalization, or from the Sunday law. And this would be the 7th. Unless there are any questions, I'm going to stop there and move on a little bit. Anybody need any clarification? Everybody? So the difference between the formalization and the Sunday law, when you mark the beginning of the seventh, this portion of the seventh that I've got here, what's the difference between this part of the seventh and what continues on? Because this was part of the answer that I gave to Corinne's question. Corinne has her hand up.
From the formalization, the seven, the seven kingdom starts well. And from the remark of the Sunday law, the seven kingdom talk like a dragon, speak
Thank
like a dragon.
Thank you. Is it Georgette?
So from the formalization, I understand that the seven kingdom take place, ways rise, and that it is in parallel with the sixth kingdom till the FTG, COP.
Good. Robert? I like that answer, Georgette. That's good.
Okay, stop. The sixth kingdom is still there at the Sunday law. But at the Sunday law, we saw at the formalization, we saw that the sixth kingdom, it's agitation of the Sunday law, of the national Sunday law. We can see the agitation from the formalization remark. And from the Sunday law to the COP, we can see the agitation of the Sunday law, but at the universal level, worldwide. The one who do this agitation during this period is still the seven kingdom.
Okay. I'm going to take all those answers, hopefully try to simplify them. In this first part, seventh kingdom is good. And this is point 3 that you can see on the board. Kingdoms begin good. Always. And then the kingdom becomes bad. We're okay with that. Starts good, ends bad. That's the difference between the two start points that I have to the seventh. I want to remind us that if I were to go back further in time, so I'll put this in parentheses, because it's a separate point that I'm not going to develop. If this is the sixth kingdom, we could have it beginning in 1798, the time of the end. We discussed that in class 1, and we've already seen that it ends at the close of probation. And my current understanding is that when we think of the seventh, that this also begins at the time of the end. This is 1989, and this comes to its end at the second advent. So there's that story. That my understanding is that that is not in contradiction to this story. It helps us to have clarity of how these kingdoms arose. I won't develop that unless someone has some specific questions, which you can ask at another time. You don't have to ask it right now. So I have another question. This was from Christiane. Question number 4. That was for Shemaine. What prophetic evidence might help us identify the moment when Trump becomes the woman of Revelation 17? Could the moment when the woman returns from holiday in 2021 be a sign marking the beginning of the seventh kingdom? So I've added this question in, even though Christiane and I had spoken and she said her question had already been answered. I believe it has been answered, but I wanted to add it in here because it's related to question 1 from Corinne. Related. So I just want to go back and look at this question a little bit slower. So the second part of the question, it said, could the moment when the woman returns from holiday? So I think this term holiday is something that Christian probably got from me. Maybe another teacher. So If it's from another teacher, I don't want to say it's wrong. If it was from me, I want to try to give a better model than that. So I just want to pick up the word holiday. I'll go back to the question and fill in some gaps if you're not sure where we are. I want to change the picture from holiday, not interested. And again, I'm going to, I guess, use crude language. The king is not sexy. The woman, it, the woman, okay? You okay? Speaking to you. For those online, we have a technical problem. We're okay to carry on? I'll wait for permission. Okay, so this is talking about the woman. We could say that she's on holiday. If someone else taught that, I don't want to disagree. Or I'd like to introduce the idea that the woman is not interested. Because the man doesn't look attractive to her. So, could the moment when the woman, it says in the question, returns from holiday, it's the year 2021, which is the correct year, I believe. So, in 2021, if we just draw it out. So this is 2021. So before this, there was a man who's a king. And what's the problem? Over here? Put your hand up. Oh, someone said something. Yeah, speak. I'll get the answer first.
So for me, the king is not attractive at this moment in 2021. The throne doesn't interest the woman at this moment.
Good. So if we didn't remember the question, that's the correct answer. So before 2021, instead of using the model of holiday, I want to suggest that the woman is not interested in the king. Doesn't look attractive to her. Then, afterwards, the woman is interested in the king. And the question is, what changed? And the answer is, it's a different king. But it's also the same king. And that's the conceptual difficulty or dichotomy. It's the balance that we have to understand. It's the same, but it's also different. I think what was just said was that even though this is described in Revelation 17 as a man, a king, so we could say that this king is um, abdicates or loses the kingship and someone else replaces the king. I think someone said it's actually a seat or a throne. If that's the case, it's actually the same seat and the same throne. But something has changed to make the woman become attractive to that throne. So think of it in two different ways. King number 6 and a brand new king number 7. Different. 6 is not the same as 7. She doesn't like 6, but she likes 7. It's the different model. But if it's the throne, or we heard earlier, the institution, then that institution is the same. I've pictured it as the throne or the seat of authority. And in that case, it's the same seat. So something must have changed with that seat to make it attractive now compared to the past. So, Corinne, did you get the question okay now? Okay, she said yes. And Robert, you wanted to make a comment or ask a question? I'm not sure.
So from 2021, there are events that will happen that will change the role of the seat or the president. That he will get more power. So COVID-19 and Ukraine war. So those two events will allow more power to the president. Mm. So this is what will give more power to the woman. This will remain. So no, this will remain, and the woman will be attracted.
Could you just redo that whole thing in English? Because I don't think people understand what was said. Well, you can't do it because she has to do it. I, yeah, I'm not saying for you to do it. I'm saying it just needs to be repeated because it was broken. The English, yeah.
Okay, so Robert explains that there are several crises during the Sixth Kingdom. He gave two examples: Ukraine war and COVID-19. Those two crises rise up the power of the seat of the Sixth Kingdom. From this moment, the seat changed, and that's the reason why the woman now is attracted to the seat.
So I'm going to try to draw that out simply.
Alors je vais essayer de le dessiner simplement.
We have this seat, which I'm going to call a throne. It's not a person. We could call it an institution. We could also call it one of the three branches of government. This is 2021. Remember, we could also put 2020 because it's to do with the change of administration. So I'm going to just say less power and more power. This seat is more powerful now than it was in the past. And if we were to say it in a disrespectful way, this woman loves power. And she's attracted to powerful men. If we're okay to conceptualize it that way. So in the previous comment, if you didn't pick it up, there's a key point that I want to point out now. How do you go from less power to more power? What happened? So this is not a full, complete answer, but hopefully it will be both accurate and simple so that you can begin to think about it and grasp hold of it. I don't know if we all picked up the word, but Robert said it's events. It's events that do this. I'm going to put a word in front of it. I'm going to call it external. External events that are not connected with the throne allow the throne to become more powerful. So, hopefully, that's both accurate and simple enough that we can all conceptualize what the change was. But I want to just give a broader picture to this so we don't misunderstand. So, if we went right back to the beginning, and I just want to check. Yeah, in the first presentation, remember we spoke about the rise of the Lamb out of the earth. And Adventists believe that that story taken from Revelation 17 happens at a certain point, which basically means that John is transported to a certain time, and John can look back into history and can look forward into history. This is chapter 13, book of Revelation. And we also teach that if you go to Revelation 17, which is a very different model of the same story, that John is taken to the same point in history. In both stories, Revelation 13 and Revelation 17, John is standing in 1798 at the time of the end. And what was described there was the rise of the lamb-like beast, which I think Corinne said was a political institution that rises in the geography that we call America. North America. A certain type of government looks like a lamb. So hopefully we're all okay with that. And we gave some dates. We had 1775 to 1783, and that was a war, the War of Independence. At the beginning of that war, 1776, there was the declaration a declaration of independence. We will separate from England. We gave another date. I want to put this in parenthesis because it's not directly connected. And this is the arrival of people into America. We call this the European pilgrims. There's another war, which we didn't discuss. This was the War of 1812. I don't know if you've all heard of the Tea Party. This was all to do with taxes. Even though the Americans had declared independence, they were still being taxed when they bought items from England. There was a secondary but related war. We discussed all of that yesterday. So, in the creation of the United States, they are going to develop a system of governance which is heavily based upon European models, which is normal. We all do things based upon our own experience, our ideas of right and wrongs. Now remember, these might be Americans, but they're still very European in their thinking. So you all know about the word states. There's 50 states. At that time, they weren't called states, they were called colonies. I don't think that's correctly spelt, but you understand. So there were 13 colonies. So there's states, and then they will also recognize, in order to be a single entity, they have to have a central government. You can't just have 13 independent atoms doing their own thing. Or 13 governments. If you're not familiar with this type of thinking, we're at a French camp, and all of you here will know about Napoleon's mindset. When he sees the countries of Europe, he doesn't want to make them all French. But he wants to bring them all under French authority. He recognizes that there are countries, but he also wants to bring them together. That's why he not only wants to be, we'll call it the emperor or the king of France, he wants to be the king of Europe. So they have a very similar dynamic going on in America. We won't call it a central government. We'll call it a federal government. And most of us have some kind of understanding of the relationship between the federation and the states. You all know the Soviet Union in 1989. That structure was identical to the United States of America. You have a central or federal government who is controlling all these several countries or states. And there is tension, always tension between the two. So when they created the United States, with all the paperwork and the legal certificates that go along with that, Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, etc., we have to understand that there is a tension. Now, if you have a federal government or a central government, the person that's in charge of that, it's very difficult. In fact, it's almost impossible to not make that person a king. So when it comes to the federal government, essentially you have a king. It's very hard to avoid. But they knew from their own experience, if you have a king, they will abuse us. So what we will do is we will create a king, we'll pretend, call them a president. And then what we'll do is we'll endue this president with king-like powers, and then tell the king, you can't use that power without our permission. And the our permission is the states or the representatives of the states. So each state will send a person, representative, to the building where the central or federal government operates, and they create a system that says we have a king, but at the same time we will limit the king's power. So if you can understand that from the beginning, we had this king, and I'm going to just change it into a throne. This throne, at the very beginning, how much power does it have? Little or a lot? Some people say a little and some people say a lot. So I want to say it's all powerful. It has all power. But the states say, because they write some laws, you're not allowed to use all your power. You can use some of it without our permission, but other things, you need our permission. And so there's this tension. Then the throne says, this is all at the beginning. What happens if there's an emergency and I need to get hold of you? They say, just send us a WhatsApp message on the group. And they'll say, phones haven't been invented yet, so that won't work. And so the king says, I'll tell you what, if it's an emergency and I can't get hold of you, give me permission to make a decision by myself without checking with you. And they say, the states, no way. And they discuss this and they realize they have to. They have to give him this power in an emergency. And you've already worked out what the problem is. Who defines an emergency? The states have their idea of an emergency and the king has his version of an emergency. So you have to ask yourself, really you do, if you were going to create a lamb-like beast, which is a copy of the kingdom of heaven, what kind of government model would you set up? The reason why I said that is because this is not a theoretical question, it's a real life question. If you believe this movement is the stone of Daniel 2, it says in the last part of the chapter, this stone will overcome the kingdoms of the world and it will rule the world. Fill the earth, it says, which means it has to become a government, which means it needs to know how to govern. And the process of understanding how this kingdom, the stone, the movement, operates, governs, how the relationship between the central government and the states works, these are the central questions that confront us. Whether it's the beginning of the United States or its end, we need to understand why things were done and what went wrong. so we don't make the same mistake. So we create a government that is fit for purpose. If you can understand that, if you can understand that, you can see what the destruction of the statue is. It's not public evangelism, as Ellen White taught. It's not going to court and winning our case, as Ellen White taught. The winning of this world is going to be behind closed doors, just like it was at the creation of the lamb-like beast. They defeated, we'll call it Europe, if you don't want to just call it England, not on the battlefield, not with arms. We might call it evangelism, and all the military imagery that Ellen White gives to the end of the world. That's not how the independence was won. It was won by creating a system of government that was better than the European versions. And I'm not saying that they were wrong, the Americans, but what I am saying is there was a problem from day one, because they created a king. That seat had all power, but that power was limited by the states. And I don't know what they could or could not see, because I think some could see it. I think some couldn't see. And I think some didn't care, because they were at heart royalists. They loved the idea of having a king who would tell them what to do. So that's what we have to decide. Were they right or wrong in their models? Because the danger is this. You have a king with all power, and what can stop them? Only one thing: the states, and how much effort or how much interest the states have in their own welfare. If the states abdicate their responsibility, you have a de facto king which we call a dictator. It's not because one has just been created at the end of the world. It was already there. And all that's changed is at the beginning, the states did their job, and at the end, they're not doing their job of keeping the king in check. On this point, I've said most of what I wanted to say. In our next class, I just want to just quickly review and just add a little bit more, because it deals with several points that are of significance to us. Let's pray. Holy God, we do thank you that you are willing to share your power, your authority, your kingdom with us. We have little realization of the great work that you have left us to do. May each of us begin to awaken to a clearer understanding of both our responsibilities and the great power that you have placed within our grasp, not only in heaven, but here on earth. In Jesus' name, amen.